All right. So I'm Marla Coppolino, for those of you who don't know me. My background is in biology and zoology and ecology and nature in general. I've loved nature since as soon as I could walk and toddle out into the leaf litter and get dirty. When I was compiling this, I found just what an incredibly vast topic this is, and that the research is all over the place, from different types of leaf litter ecology, such as tropical areas and even non-forest ecology leaf litter. But what I'm focusing on today to keep us on track is native to our area. So this is all about ecology of the Northeast and deciduous forest in particular, because pine forest leaf litter is different and has different organisms, but I tried to focus on one thing. And I'm fascinated by organisms and ecosystems in general that hold secrets. So what I love about leaf litter is it just on your first perceptions of it, it's crunchy leaves below your feet when you're on a trail, or if you happen to go off trail in the woods somewhere. And to me, I love nothing more than peering down and getting down on my hands and knees and looking and seeing what's there. And for those of you who know me, I study snails, land snails, forest land snails in particular. And I'm so interested in their secret lives and what they're doing in there. So tons of mysteries, more questions than answers. This is the kind of topic that the more you know, the less you feel like you know. So I've tried to keep it kind of high level and not get into too many complicated chemical cycles and things. But let's just start out. What is leaf litter? So basically, it's not just leaves, but it's the fallen, dead leaves and sticks, knots, barks and whole, any kind of coarse woody debris that falls from trees, plus thousands and thousands of organisms, many of which we don't even have identified. And to that together is what we call our leaf litter community, which is an ecosystem in and of itself. And it does many things, which I'll share some of them in here in this presentation today. So I've always been kind of bothered by the name leaf litter, because litter, think about it, litter, what is litter? Rubbish, it's garbage, caca, you don't want it, something you throw away. Well, no, it's a terrible name for this because it makes it sound really unimportant, and quite the contrary is true. And sometimes scientists will call it duff, and that is an even worse definition. If you go to the dictionary and look it up, it's got some really unsavory British definitions to it. And then the American ones are even worse. It even means to steal or alter brands on cattle. What the heck? So poor leaf litter doesn't ring with most average people in the get-go. But by the end of this presentation, you'll see I have a new name for it. Well, what's it really about? So decomposition is the main thing. You've got dead leaves and debris falling on the forest floor, and it has to be doing something down there. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight is about how this stuff breaks down. And it's really just as an important process as sunlight hitting leaves and photosynthesis happening, which gives the tree its food from that direction, from the leaf aspect, right? But there's also tons of trophic levels within the leaf litter and food webs and enzymes being released by different organisms, and that's breaking down the litter into organic matter, nutrients. All of these leach into the soil, and then the trees and plants ultimately reabsorb these nutrients, and the process starts again. So why is it important? In a nutshell, let's say a decomposing nutshell, leaf litters, it's nothing short of a vital part of the ecosystem. And with all this nutrient cycling, carbon cycling in the forest, you could not have a forest without the leaf litter, really. It's also a protective layer for the soil layer itself, which helps a lot of things. It helps prevent soil erosion, and it regulates the soil's microclimate and pH and chemistry and temperature as well. So it regulates a lot of things for the soil layer underneath. And it's a habitat for so many animals and organisms. And that's one of my favorite parts of it, is to see who lives there. So how does this happen? 3 main ways, but this is highly abbreviated. So enzyme release. So you got fungi and bacteria that release enzymes, and that's how they break down the leaves into elements, other compounds and elements. And they can also help with, as a lot of you probably know, with plant morphology. There's a tough exterior cell wall, but when the leaf is died, that is still difficult for some organisms to penetrate, but the enzymes do a great job of that. And then there's detritivores. So these are the animals that feed especially and sometimes exclusively on the dying and dead leaves and woody debris. And then finally, with rain on the forest floor, that ends up naturally leaching a lot of the water-soluble compounds down into the soil, where they're useful for the roots of the trees and other plants. So that's, again, I'm keeping things high level because it becomes very complicated. And how fast does this happen? Well, I can't get one answer on that. It depends on so many things. If you have a dry season or a wet season, it depends on what kinds of trees you got, because they decompose at different rates. For this talk, I'm trying to focus mostly on deciduous forests. But if you throw in pine and spruce leaves, needles, and things like that, they're a little tougher and they break down a little more slowly. Of course, the abundance and diversity of the organisms that are living within the leaf litter habitat make a big difference too. So I love talking about the players in this situation, in this ecology. So plants are primary producers, right? They are taking energy from the sun, and through their chlorophyll, they are making food for themselves, essentially. And they're also, in addition to being comprised of nutrients themselves, they are forming the structural aspects of the habitat. So leaf litter is a structure. You've got these close together leaves piled on top of another. With weight and with rain, the lower levels are more compressed and the fluffier ones are on top. And these different layers within the leaf litter have different qualities and have different organisms. And you think of it not just as habitat, but as microhabitats for these organisms. I'm going to start out with the littlest ones. So what you can't see going on are the bacteria and their action, and protozoans and other microorganisms, and their primary action to decompose the leaves and the woody debris is by releasing enzymes, as I said, and that breaks down the organic matter. It's one of the primary ways. And then they in turn become food for other organisms. So I'm going to do my best to kind of construct and keep these in your minds so you have a food web going on here. So next we have protists, which are slime molds. They used to be classified with fungi, but no longer. They're actually quite different. And the main group that of the types that you're seeing in my photos here are Myxomycota, and they're quite cool. They seem to have a mind of their own. Different parts of them get together and literally sniff out food. And you do experiments on these things, and they can find their way through a maze with a food reward at the end. Amazing. So they're feeding on very small things like bacteria and elements of the fungi, also algae and other microorganisms. And in turn, you would think, ew, who wants to eat slime molds? But there's quite a few animals that do, including snails and earthworms and others. Fungi and lichens. Lichens are kind of their own thing, but I'm lumping them in here, so we won't go on the full night. But they are certainly some of the biggest decomposers of the forest floor, and they are feeding basically on the fungi that they're breaking down. They release enzymes, and then they can absorb the nutrients that remain. And in turn, they become food for other animals. So there's lots of snails and other animals that will chomp down on the fruiting bodies, the mushrooms. And sometimes you can see that happening. You'll often find a mushroom, it's been around for a day or two in the forest, it's often munched by snails, and you can see some of the little marks that they leave on it. Insects, this is just such a big world that I can barely scratch the surface, but you've got a little bit of everything in the insect communities. So you've got detritivores who are eating the decaying vegetation, and then you got predators who are eating the insects that are eating the vegetation, eating the detritivores, and then in turn, a lot of those insects are prey for something else. Some are scavengers and sort of cleanup crews of eating dead things. And they're coprophagic too. So they're eating the feces of other animals. And some of them are parasitic. And the other interesting thing about insects is there's all different life stages of them within the leaf litter. So you've got eggs, instars, if it's that kind of insect that grows in that manner, but also you've got the larval and pupal insects, and some of them overwinter in the leaf litter, so that's a safe place for them. Is that not the briefest treatment you've ever seen on insects? Yes, well, they're part of this larger picture. Arachnids are spiders and mites. I love finding them in the leaf litter. You don't get so much with the spiders, the web makers, except for funnel web weavers and trapdoor kinds of spiders. But other than that, a lot of them are like wolf spiders and jumping spiders. So they are moving about and finding their prey. And then mites eat a smaller level, but they are also important and abundant in leaf litter. Other arthropods, so we've got things like the wood lice, and then we have got pill bugs, which are related, and millipedes and centipedes, and they're a little bit of everything too. Their roles include being detritivores, particularly the millipedes and the wood lice. And then you've got the centipedes, which are predators of them and other things. And in turn, the centipedes become prey by often something that's outside the leaf litter entirely, like birds love to pick through leaf litter and find centipedes. Scavengers, and again, millipedes and the wood lice are also coprophagic in nature, and so there's a lot going on there. Nematodes and annelids, so you got your worms, and they are mostly detritivores. they're moving through the vegetation, particularly as it becomes more degraded, so the lower layers of it, and they become prey to many other animals like salamanders that are often in the leaf litter, and then some of the larger animals like moles and birds and skunks also like to rummage through leaf litter for worms. Mollusks, this is probably my favorite topic. So you've heard me talk a lot about snails before. I'm interested in the native snails. So this little slug fellow that you see in the upper left is actually a native slug to the Northeast. And snails and slugs do an interesting thing with the leaves. So the one in the upper right has actually skeletonized that leaf. So it can't digest the harder structures, the what do you call that? The skeleton of the leaf, basically. Doesn't have the means to do that, but it will eat all the softer parts of the leaf. And it's quite notable that how very small a lot of snails are. When I'm looking through leaf litter under the scope, it's my practice to take up bags of leaf litter and spend hours and hours sorting through it under the dissecting scope and picking out these little teeny tiny guys. These are not baby snails, they're full grown, and they are doing a job of decomposing the materials in the leaf litter. And then in turn, I didn't say this here, but they certainly become prey animals. They're full of nutrients, snails are, so they become eaten by just about everything, from salamanders and toads to birds and moles and chipmunks and things like that. So the leaf litter community goes from microbes all the way up to vertebrates that spend a good deal of their lives, and in some cases their whole lives, in here. Christy, I know you're quite fond of salamanders, and they're abundant in the leaf litter. I always love finding them. And I always say, if you're going to find salamanders, you're probably going to find snails, or you can bet that that salamander has eaten a snail or two for its meals that day. Toads too, same thing. They'll eat insects and crickets and things like that, as well as snails. And snakes, especially smaller snakes like ringneck snakes and things like that, are quite happy in the leaf litter. They've got cover and security, and they don't have to go far before they find something that's to eat. So that's the cast of characters, but there are even more that I didn't put in here. Can't forget springtails and lots of other arthropods that live in the leaf litter layer. Okay, and mosses too. But those were the primary ones that do a lot of work. So the cycles in leaf litter, this is where it can get very, very complicated. And as much as I wanted to try and find a simple diagram, oh my goodness. So I found this one. This one in particular was used for trying to illustrate what happens when you manipulate certain parts. But just know this, the diagram works fine for as hard as it is to really take away from it. If you study the arrows, these things are all related. So organic matter in the soil is really related to pH, and certainly the fungi control a lot of the nutrient availability. There's so many darn arrows in this that I long to make something simpler. And I found this one. I didn't put the reference, but it's in my reference list at the end. So you've got plants that are releasing their leaves and coarse woody debris, and it turns over thanks to all the organisms that we were just looking at, and then those nutrients are returned to the soil. The plant uptakes it, And so it goes, and the leaves drop and start the process again. And I still longed for something better. You would be surprised. There's no one simple thing out there. So I made this, and this is a very crude diagram that just shows you what happens. So you get the sun that is the helping that the sunlight results in photosynthesis in the leaves on the plants on the tree. And then those leaves that fall become part of the leaf litter layer. And thanks to all the processes that I just touched upon, you end up with broken down compounds and also elementary sulfur, calcium, or nitrogen, and so on, which go down to the soil and are absorbed up through the roots of the trees. Also, a good amount of CO2 is released by all these metabolic processes in the leaf litter, and that is up into the atmosphere, which is then absorbed through the leaves for part of their photosynthesis process. So let's talk about maybe some of the amazing benefits that come from having leaf litter on the ground. So, so many things. You have nutrients that are being recycled out of the dead leaves and woody debris, and these are re-entering the living cycles of organisms. And all these processes allow the nutrients to go back into the soil so the plants can take them up by their roots. The leaf litter itself forms a protective layer for seedlings, for many things. But if you've ever noticed in the very earliest parts of the spring, if you like to go out in the woods and find all those little plants that are the first ones you see, they are benefiting from having the protection from the leaf litter. So even when they're starting to germinate under the soil, they have this nice, cozy, kind of say a blanket on top of them that's protecting them when we have those late snows and frosts and all that. Soil would not be soil without leaf litter. So the leaf litter layer is protecting the soil from drying out, from erosion for sure. And again, the nutrients, it's a natural fertilizer. And then all the larger vertebrate animals and probably others I'm not thinking of all benefit from leaf litter layer. Have you ever been out in the woods and you see squirrels and chipmunks and skunks and everything else? They're digging around in the leaf litter layer to find tasty snacks. So there's a plethora of food to be found in the leaf litter layer, hiding spaces, and finally, of course, ultimately, it nourishes the trees from the roots and CO2 in the air. So anything in nature these days, we're well aware that between climate change and everything else, things are changing. And just thought I would bring a few of the current things that's on my mind up. Microplastics, they're getting into our soils and systems so much that even when sometimes we go to the most pristine, wonderful woodlands, we'll find plastic bottles or we'll find bits of something that was discarded, and they may sort of kind of partially break down, but then we're finding little bits, and then to the point where we don't see. But there have been studies out there that examine the levels of microplastics that's ending up in natural areas. Acidic rainfall is another that obviously is going to change the pH level of the leaf litter and consequently the soil. But a lot of organisms can't adapt to that change. So snails are one of them. Snails have a great need for calcium for building their shell and for their bodily functions, their own metabolic functions, and acid rainfall changes that, and a lot can't survive. Chemical contamination, we hate hearing about this, but yes, it happens in a lot of places, even protected places. Invasive species are a problem. And again, sometimes I'll think I'm in the most pristine, wonderful, secluded woodlands. And no, there I am finding things that are not supposed to be there. So instead of some of the native plants, I'm finding little groves of buckthorn is a big one. If you don't know how to identify it, there's some buckthorn there on the right. And superficially, it looks a little bit like dogwood leaves, but it's not. Buckthorn has these really long, nasty thorns, and it's really hard to remove, and it changes the soil chemistry around it. Same with honeysuckle, the invasive honeysuckles we have in our area, and multiflora rose, hard to get rid of. And once they get a stronghold in the forest, they can quite rapidly take over and cause a monoculture. And all the organisms in the leaf litter, they really can't adapt. They're not meant to be coexisting with these invasives. One of the scary things right now, I'm sure you're all hearing about jumping worms, and they are changing so dramatically the leaf litter and soils, and just racing through and very quickly decomposing it. But in place, then they're leaving bare patches of soil with lots of little telltale clumps where they've been. I don't know a whole lot about particular damage they're doing in forests to leaf litter, but I can only imagine with such a delicate balance as it is, they can't be good. They're hard to get rid of. So there's a lot of research out there on leaf litter, yet I keep finding articles that conflict one another, or they're for a very specific type of forest ecosystem, or they keep repeating, need more work, need more research. So it's that very thing where you ask a question and you try to solve it and answer it with some experiments and your results in your paper, and then it just automatically leads to many more questions. So I'm just going to touch on a couple for you. So one that I kind of intuitively knew, I'm happy to see this published, that soil animals, all those ones we met in earlier part of the presentation, they speed up decomposition. Well, yeah, it seems obvious, but again, doing good science means that you have to demonstrate it. And in this particular study in 2020, the animal feces decomposed 38% faster on average than the dead leaves. So that is great. So I've also noticed that there's a lot of animals that will feed on the feces of other animals. I would assume that's breaking it down even further into compounds and elements that are become nutritious. So that was fun. I learned something that is kind of disturbing, but in Europe, leaf litter was actually collected from forest floors and then used for domestic animal bedding. So for horses and pastured animals, I don't know, stalled animals, cows, it was taken up and used as bedding, whereas today we might use straw or wood chips or something like that. So this study, this researcher, she did some manipulation and some replication of those kinds of removal, and she found some interesting results. Among them was that litter itself acts as, in her study, a barrier to small seedlings. Now, this was done somewhere in Europe. So I don't know. I've been always of the thought that it is helping the seedlings along by providing protection and nutrients and all that. And that's one of her findings. And generally, decline in soil fauna. You are removing basically a habitat. So these animals and organisms we talked about, they really won't thrive in just a soil environment. That they need the leaf litter layer. So that was interesting. And then there's a paper that just was looking at, well, what else needs to be done? And this came out and just said where there's a lot of gaps in the knowledge base on leaf litter. So this one suggested more about how when you have qualitative and quantitative is numbers, qualitative is characteristics of the litter, can influence decomposition and nutrient dynamics. How you quantitate things in leaf litter is no small task. It tends to be patchy, even in a relatively small area of forest. Depends so much on the species of trees and the species there. It depends on elevation. It depends on weather and seasonal differences. But anyway, that was suggested. And also to study both the independent and combined effects of nitrogen and phosphorus seemed to be something that they said was important. And interspecific interactions in decomposition. Gosh, I mean, that is such it's such a complicated idea to even begin to parse apart. You could spend a good bit of time just studying the life habits of one organism, right? And then what ecology is putting that organism in context with other organisms and environmental situation that it's in. So I don't know the answer. I left this feeling like, wow, this is really, really complicated. So here we go. But I will conclude by saying that through my thoughts about leaf litter, and as you heard me say in the beginning, litter equals rubbish, garbage, something you don't want. But this is something we do want and need, and it's a vital part of the forest ecosystem. So take a deep breath and say this. So leaf litter, no, new name. It's a valuable, biodiverse, decomposing, nutrient cycling, soil forming, protective layer and habitat of the forest floor. Maybe we can make an acronym. I don't know, but that suits it a lot better than leaf litter, which makes it just sad and forgotten feeling. So that's my talk. I'm happy to answer whatever questions I can. Please note that all the photographs in this presentation are mine. I think the only one wasn't was I got a Wikimedia Commons photo of bacteria that's in the public domain. So that's it. And my references are here, but that's it. So what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Marla. That was wonderful. I'm going to go to the chat here. See what questions we have. I know, Colette, you had a question. Would you like to ask Marla?
Oh, sorry. I had to figure out how to unmute.
Okay.
So, you know, I love the forest and I love everything from the ground up. And so, but just on a funny note, I'm thinking, wow, it sounds like trees are kind of like cannibals because they're eating the remains of themselves in a sense. I realize that a lot of things are, you know, breaking it down so that it can go back up, but it just seems a little funny to me on the surface.
I never thought of it that way quite, but yeah, I mean, but everything gets recycled. You heard people say that, after all, the water that we drink in any ordinary glass may have gone through dinosaur, could be dinosaur pee. So, everything in the world gets recycled. But I don't know if that they're cannibals, because look at how many animals and organisms and process that their own leaves are going through. So they shed something that provides for so many others, and then it comes back to them in the form of nutrients.
Thanks, Marla.
You're welcome. But I'll keep that cannibal thing in mind. It seems like the makings of a good, comic strip or something.
Mhm. Okay, Dave Shepard suggests, why not renaming leaf litter? Why not add it specifically to the list of 4 or 5 forest layers as the nutrient cycling layer?
Well, that's a good idea. I could call it the nutrient cycling litter, but there's a certain amount of nutrient cycling that still happens in the soil layer too, right? There's soil organisms that I was trying to avoid here because I'm just in the act of trying to compartmentalize for the purposes of presentation. What other layers are you thinking in addition to the soil layer?
Well, if I may, typically we talk about a canopy layer, an understory layer, a shrub layer, an herb layer, and then a forest flora soil layer. Actually, you could just differentiate between soil and the forest floor if you wanted to catch this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we do. Yeah, because a lot of the things that happen in that leaf litter layer are benefiting the soil layer. So even just rain leaching will move some of the nutrients from the leaves down into the soil. Does that help?
Yeah, I was just playing with the idea of renaming it a little bit, not I take your point that litter is kind of a pejorative term for it.
Yeah, it is. It's an underdog of the understory.
It's the same way they refer to wood on the forest floor after a timber harvest as slash and other misnomers. Debris, woody debris, all with bad connotations when it's good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, Dave Dittmer mentioned might be a good field exercise for a future master naturalist class to dig into the leaf litter and see what's there. I really enjoyed that when we did it in a stream. And
yes.
Yeah, I worked on a biodiversity project one time where we collected leaf litter, and you could put something called a Burley's funnel, and you basically drop the leaf litter in a funnel, put a jar of alcohol, ethanol below it, and turn a light on top, and microorganisms will move away from heat and dryness, and then you can collect them and identify. And it was during a very large biodiversity study, and it was one of the most enjoyable things that I did, because I discovered all these things I didn't know were there previously, especially a lot of springtails, the little tiny springtails, and pseudoscorpions, which are these little microscopic things that have pinchers and look like little teeny tiny scorpions. So it was a lot of fun.
I should have had some in this, but this was by no means comprehensive. Yeah, it's great fun to see what's in there.
So let's see, Marla Mark asks, are there unique leaf litter organisms between deciduous and evergreen trees?
Yes, and I can answer that from my narrow field of expertise, which is snails. So I often find different species of snails in different types of leaf litter. I find more of, it may not mean anything, but I find far fewer polygyrid snails and far more Zonitidae snails in pine litter. And it's because of the acidity. The polygyrid snails they tend to be the larger snails that you'll find, and they have an outer reflected lip of the shell opening, and they are calcium loving organisms. So they need more calcium, which you don't find as much in a pine forest. So in areas, and also certain trees, I know where to look because of the tree. So beech trees are high in calcium. The leaves are high in calcium. So you'll often find a greater abundance and diversity of snails around those trees, as opposed to oaks. So yeah, and then oaks leaves have a lot of tannins in them, which are snails are repulsed by. So that's just the very small snail's perspective, but I am sure that you are going to find different organisms in the other kinds of litter. I spend most of my time in deciduous mixed forest, mixed beech, maple types of forest.
Great, thank you.
That's my habitat.
Let's see, next, Nina just says, thank you for simplifying while still illustrating the complexities of this study. Let's see, and Maureen brought in jumping worms to a talk she did yesterday, said that they're horrifying. They can destroy that wonderful organic layer in days. She asked, is it possible that they are responsible for the reduction of white oak sapling?
I don't know that. But that would be something interesting to explore.
Yeah, I'm going to just throw in, I mentioned it more rhetorically because of Christy, you sent out that, email about that researcher needing white oak acorns. And I just started like, whoa, and Marla put it together beautifully. I mean, the interconnectedness of these nutrients and structures is so divine. And, I just wonder if that white oak acorn study is looking at the connection with jumping worms. So it's just a kind of a question I'm throwing out there in my own head. Yeah.
If you find out, it'd be interesting to share.
Yeah, like I just have like a lot of connection with folks from the nature center I work at, and I'll just go house to house and collect whatever people want, and then bring it to that researcher. And I'm just so curious as to what she is looking at regarding that project. Yeah, it's really interesting.
One of the other scary things about something invasive like jumping worms is that the kind of the regular predators of earthworms, they can't keep up with a jumping worm. That's frogs and toads and birds and moles will often eat earthworms, and quite frankly, most of our earthworms aren't supposed to be here. We don't have native species, right? But jumping worms are just a whole new monster in there that they have what do they call it? Defensive movements and things, and they move like a snake and they jump, and so anything that would normally eat a smaller, more docile earthworm is not going to be able to eat them.
They have I was watching them, and I haven't seen them under my dissecting microscope yet. They're still on the porch waiting to be put in vinegar, but their mouth parts are just, I don't know, it's kind of like something from Star Wars. But and you can actually see that working. They extend it out and look around with it. not look with eyes, but, just searching. And yeah, I know. I try not to anthropomorphize things too much and not label horrifying versus nice, whatever. But I couldn't help myself by saying horrifying. And they're so big when they're adults. They're huge. The ones I'm getting from my gardens now are 8 inches long. And they're destroying turf. And I'm wondering what they're doing to, the little native garden plants I'm putting in or trying to.
Mhm.
So it's a big deal.
Yeah.